and welcome to the Filmstein Podcast, a podcast where we try to articulate a love for art and storytelling. Today I am joined by my electric friend, Lucy.
Hello, everyone.
I'm glad everybody could join us today because we will be discussing James Mangold's 2024 film, A Complete Unknown. Any of our longtime listeners will know that we are big fans of James Mangold with Ford versus Ferrari. Excellent film. I was very excited to see A Complete Unknown. I know he had that Indiana Jones movie a couple years ago, and I have to admit, I don't know about that. I don't really have any interest in Indiana Jones. Haven't seen any of that garbage. But I was very excited to see A Complete Unknown with Timothée Chalamet. And I have to admit, I'm not a huge fan of Bob Dylan. I've had people in my life who were major fans of Bob. So I've listened to my fair share of Bob Dylan, no doubt. But I've always been a Frank Zappa fan of the greats, you know. But I will say, while watching A Complete Unknown, while listening to Timothée Chalamet's renditions, James Mangold's renditions, I had forgotten what Bob Dylan sounded like. I was like, wow.
That's funny.
This is awesome. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't not hear Timothée Chalamet's versions now, all of a sudden. So I had to go back and listen. I was like, oh, okay. That's awesome. I was really surprised after watching this film. I didn't think it'd be very good. Just because of the nature of biopics, I just think they have a very low ceiling, right? Like the Elvis movie recently, decent enough. Austin Butler gives a great performance. The perspective of his manager and everything is fine. We recently covered La Bamba. La Bamba's not a great example of a typical biopic, right? But it does kind of still inevitably run into that low ceiling of not offering a lot. But one thing I did find super interesting in A Complete Unknown is this focus on how insufferable Bob was. How insufferable it was to work with him, to love him. It was frustrating watching Bob Dylan deal with these couple of women in his life, dealing with his manager, dealing with his fans, and it really doesn't make you like Bob very much. He comes across like an asshole, right? You want more out of Bob and Sylvie and Bob and Joan, and maybe even Bob and Johnny Cash, or maybe just more out of Bob and Bob. He lives in his own world, and it comes across very thorough in the movie. And I was surprised to see such a tight focus on that. It reminded me kind of that dreaded legendary nihilist or even a scientist in a film, right? These are not interesting characters. A nihilist in a movie, right? Boring. Scientists, boring. Matt Damon and The Martian, if it was any other movie than The Martian, it probably would have been boring, right? They have to be in the right movie. It has to be from the right angle, the right perspective. And our perspective here of dealing with Bob, because that's kind of the whole movie, is just everyone dealing and tolerating Bob for one reason or another. It's awesome, I will say. I'm very impressed. But I'm very curious, my friend, did Timothée Chalamet deserve an Oscar nom?
I'm glad to hear you enjoyed this movie because I had no idea if you did or not.
I'm a man of mystery.
You're a man of mystery. Much like Bob here, I'll tell you that. The movie was good. It was a decent watch, but not gonna lie, I was waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it did.
Sort of,
towards the end. And it took a while to get there. And I don't think it was pacing issues. I think I was the issue here on the type of movie we were watching, because it very much reminded me of the 2023 movie, The Taste of Things, and how slow that movie was, with these slice of life qualities to it. This movie was largely character driven, and I didn't love it. I didn't love that quality about it. It felt very moody. And it felt kind of poetic, like Bob's music. But at times I feel like I either wasn't getting it or it was going completely over my head.
Yeah, the film, first and foremost, kind of seemed like a movie made for the people who knew Bob. Maybe not totally unlike La Bamba, right? The people who suffered after Richie.
Yeah, I can see that. And yes, the film touches on the struggles, specifically Bob's struggles of being famous and his career taking off so fast, and the struggle of switching genres. He's also facing these public expectations. So this is essentially a film about nonconformity and what freedom is, which I think beautifully ties in with what's going on in the 1960s. We have the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and all this widespread social and political activism. And I really enjoy those aspects of the movie. But then we have Bob. I think Timothée Chalamet delivers a great performance. Yes, he deserves that Oscar nomination. And when I saw pictures of young Bob, I thought he looked kind of like him, which was weird.
Yeah, at certain times.
Yeah. And it was weird both in the sense of, oh, that's what young Bob Dylan looked like. And then, oh, Timothée Chalamet can look like that? Because that's not what he looks like either, you know? They did something to his hair. I think he gained some weight for this role. They changed him up, and it was amazing. But I'm also not surprised because from Timothy's previous roles, he shares a lot of qualities with Bob. He plays this mumbling, contrarian type so well. And I was very much impressed with the music, with his singing. I know we briefly touched in La Bamba about that not being Lou Diamond Phillips singing Richie Valence's songs. It was another band called Los Lobos. So I, like you, was very impressed. Because I guess you kind of know he can sing from Wonka, but this sealed the deal. Edward Norton was great as Pete Seeger, and everyone else was okay at whatever role they played. The movie is beautiful. The music, of course, is great. And I, like you, am very impressed with this tight focus we had, not only with Bob's emotions and mannerisms, but also to the time. This specific period of time in Bob's life. Again, it's not like La Bamba where we just focus on a few months of Richie's life because that's all he had. He died. But Bob Dylan is 83 years old. And he's been doing this thing since what? The late 50s, early 60s? This man has been performing and has a life, a musical life, I guess, worth talking about for 60 years.
Yeah, you can almost see a sequel to this Bob Dylan movie.
And I just appreciate this focus on him at this moment, at this period of time. It wasn't like his whole life. He didn't get a kid here. He didn't get married here. So I like that.
Yeah, it shows a lot of restraint with the movie discussing someone so storied and making a movie ultimately not all that interested in the music itself, but more interested in, from my perspective, how difficult it was to work with him.
Yeah, it wasn't even about Bob.
It was about the effects Bob had on the industry, on the audience, the folk audience, his management, lovers.
Right, we didn't get any internal monologue, any of his thoughts, I guess, except through his music.
Yeah. We get a brief glimpse behind the curtain, I think, which really sticks out to me when he chases after Sylvie.
Yeah.
When she's about to get back on the ferry. And it's like he had that initial urge of, I don't know, like letting a little bit of humanity come out. And then the rest of Bob caught up with him. It's like, oh, well, I'm not really interested in this, actually.
I did love the end of the film. It was insanely emotional, which confused me further because the rest of the film didn't make me feel like this ending did. But the ending was the best part for me. I'll also add that I'm not very familiar with Bob as a person. Not that I'm familiar with a lot of celebrities as a person, but I guess today's celebrities are all over social media that you know a little bit more about them that way than you did older celebrities. But I'm very familiar with the songs, especially when, Guns N' Roses does a cover of your song, and that's a band you're more familiar with than Bob Dylan. But I just feel like this film introduces Bob Dylan to this next generation.
Yeah, it's kind of funny we're so many generations removed from the tidal wave Bob introduced to the world that there are people who have no idea. There are musicians probably today who have no idea that they're being influenced by Bob Dylan. So it is kind of interesting to introduce Bob to the modern world through this movie at this point in his career through this lens of, I think, frustration and almost offering this meta-narrative of a painful, necessary change that's needed. Because we also get that really eerie apocalyptic song out of Bob when everybody's, hitting the ground because they think bombs are about to go off. Everybody's taking shelter and he's at a bar performing. There seems to be something wrapped up in Bob offering that change is painful and at times necessary and worth fighting for, worth being stubborn for, worth being insufferable for. Because there also seems to be this part of Bob that's working on an out-of-body kind of experience, out-of-body kind of level, because he sacrifices any potential relationship. We get a glimpse of it with him and Sylvie, but there almost seems to be a sense in Bob that he's not here for that. He's here to offer something much bigger than just himself. Part of me wishes that we would have got some kind of monologue out of him at the very end, something more manifesto-like, but it may even defeat the purpose, though, if we did, because at some point he feels just like a pawn, a mouthpiece for this otherworldly thing that's kind of moving through him in his music. And it kind of comes back to the whole point of him opening up a little bit with people around him, him not being so stubborn and so inside himself.
Yeah, that's a great analysis of Bob in this film, because there were a lot of things that left me confused, specifically with his relationship with Joan. Like, what? You guys aren't lovers. You guys aren't friends. What are you? And there was this getting together, then her kicking him out of the hotel. Like, Bob, why are you even here? And he's like, well, I don't know.
Why are any of us here?
Yeah, he should have freaking said that, yeah. I wouldn't have been surprised if he said that. He doesn't seem to be very grounded, and left me struggling with what the central conflict was to this film. Like I said, we get tidbits of his struggles, but he's not dealing with those struggles. And if he is, and it is through his music, and it is through his lyrics, and I need to pay more attention to those, then that might be on me, that this movie requires a lot more out of the audience than just sitting down at the movie theater and watching it. Because what I get from Bob is that he doesn't fit in, but he's keeping himself from fitting in. And I also can't tell if he's struggling with his freedom
or struggling with his servitude to his music. That's some of that balance, I think, that it's hardly a balance because it's pretty one-sided, that we almost see this individualism in Bob, his concern for Sylvie, but the rest of Bob seems to be somewhere else, somewhere much bigger, being a mouthpiece for a generation instead.
Sounds like Bob just needs to get over himself. Come down to earth, man.
He's the chosen one. Bob's the chosen one.
The end of the film was crazy, to say the least. I love that he stuck it to them. He played his music the way he wanted to play it, but then he had to become submissive. This public expectation won out any of the authenticity that he wanted to keep. This is just what he wanted to play. He didn't care what it fit into. He just thought it was good music that he wanted to share. And something about Johnny Cash being the only person on his side throughout the film, but I guess at the end Sylvie had already left, so I wouldn't count her per se. But him and Johnny Cash being pen pals and basically inspiring him to do whatever the fuck he wants. But then in the end, he's the one that makes him go back out there to give the crowd what they want.
Yeah, there seems to be this implication of to get what you want in its entirety requires some compromise. At least a little bit.
Some give and take.
Yeah, mostly take, but you got to give just enough. You got to be hot enough and popular enough, right?
Yeah, but from the point of view of the film, it felt like he just betrayed his self-worth at that moment, at that instant. It got so crazy, so chaotic. But a lot of that felt unrelatable to me. I just live and do what feels right, but I also just go to work, and that's an overstatement because I work from home, and I watch movies, and I go buy groceries, and I'm not famous. I've never been put in a position to test my conformity. So a lot of this movie just felt so unrelatable. The only thing that felt relatable, and I know it was expressed in the film, I just can't think of how right now, was this phoniness, this fakeness that was in the air. I guess I felt that most with Pete and Bob's relationship. You got me, you're my friend, until you don't got me and you're not my friend.
Sure, and I guess Pete's angle kind of elevates the frustration of dealing with Bob to a new level because Pete's his manager. He's the liaison between Bob and where Bob performs, who Bob works with, right? So he's inherently kind of the bad guy. Pete is. I guess if Johnny Cash is the guy who's in Bob's court, Pete's the one that makes sure stays on his diet, goes to the gym, he stays on his ass about X, Y, and Z and expects that out of him too.
Yeah, but Pete's so nice.
And Pete understands Bob too, but he also understands the business and the expectation and the tradition, right? And to me, there's almost a bittersweetness, I guess, in the end. It's hard to get a read on it too because Bob's so Bob. Timothy Chalamet, he's always playing. He reminded me a lot of the mystery aloof boyfriend from Lady Bird.
Mm-hmm.
That's Bob when he's a teenager right there. It's kind of bittersweet at the end here when Bob takes the stage for the final time in the movie because there seems to be this kind of recognition of the importance of tradition and not losing that, and maybe even to the degree of not losing sight of who brought you to the dance. Pete brought you to the dance. This crowd brought you to the dance, right? So it's kind of a different question of just compromise. It is maybe a little bit of get off your high horse kind of thing where to the degree that what people expect, what this crowd has come to expect out of Bob is in its right a great thing, and Bob should just kind of come to terms with that. Come down to earth, kind of. There seems to be this kind of otherworldly arrogance in this man, in his kind of cadence and how he just moves around in the world, his aloofness.
Yes, but I thought Pete was cool and would be on board with Bob wanting to try something different. At least musically. And I say that because towards the beginning of the film, we see Pete in this court case for the "This land is your land, this land is my land" song, defending it, and just how controversial that song was at the time. Seems like this man is up for change. And at no point in the film did I get any added pressure for him to do a character change like that. It, to me, and I guess to Bob, it did feel all of a sudden. Like, whoa, wait, why aren't you on board with this? Why do you want me not to play the songs that I've been showing you this whole time?
Yeah, it's almost like now Pete's part of the machine. He's got his show. He's had his fame. He's just another piece of this machine to kind of perpetuate just how things are. Yeah, I guess you could maybe read into Pete Seeger's silence when it came to Bob and his change because of his controversial stance with the Communist Party and him being investigated with that. Because eyes on Bob Dylan and this new controversial, radical sounding music might bring eyes to Pete again. Maybe. Doesn't come across quite right. I'm not sure if that's what the court case is about exactly. I can't remember, but yeah, Pete's angle in this is kind of hard to get a gauge on outside of him being frustrated along with everybody else.
Because do you think we have a distorted, unreliable character kind of problem? Do we see this movie from Bob's point of view? I know we brought it up with Forrest Gump that Forrest Gump's world is deeply distorted.
I think it's actually probably the inverse, where we're one of many who are seeing just Bob and the frustrations Bob has to bring, all of his baggage. So it's kind of the inverse. We're not seeing Bob's perspective on the world. We're seeing the world's perspective on Bob.
Oh.
And it's kind of a singular focus, really.
Yeah.
And it's pretty committed.
Yes.
I like that a lot. And we get little peeks under the curtain with Bob, and he just seems to be like, on second thought, I don't know if I'm in love, Which is nice. It brings him down to earth for a split minute. It shows the level of egomania, maybe, in him. At least the perceived egomania. Pete seems to represent the pinnacle of conformity, I guess. At least maybe to avoid eyes. Maybe that's part of the problem here. So it's hard to get a read on what's going on there, I think.
Did this film feel like the 1960s to you? I think we go from 61 to 63, if I'm not mistaken, but we stay in that early 60s period.
Yeah, sure. It's pretty intimate. We have a lot of intimate scenes inside venues and buildings and rooms and whatnot. And I guess what really kind of sells the 60s vibe is the venue where Bob performs. It doesn't feel like the 60s is a character kind of thing.
Right.
Like Forrest Gump.
We don't have the riots or the movements displayed like we would in a 60s film. I guess to me a lot of the clothing didn't feel too 60s, but I can't say I was paying a lot of attention to the clothing. I guess the biggest giveaway to me was the smoking. We don't see smoking really in a lot of films anymore.
Yeah, did Timothée Chalamet smoke all those cigarettes? Is he addicted after this film?
I bet he did.
All right, man. Well, thank you for watching this film with me and talking about it here today.
You're welcome.
Do you have a budget guess?
I'm going with 50 mil. That seems a little high. But this movie was 2 hours and 20 minutes. And there were a lot of moving pieces, or I guess a lot of sets. Several rooms, hotels, venues. So I could imagine that taking some time, some money, especially making them look like they're from the 60s. So I don't know. I made my best guess on this one.
Yeah, were those crowds real crowds? Were they CG at the folk festival? I don't know. But it says here that it was 50 to 70 million.
Ooh,
so you were in the pocket.
Nice guess.
That's a big range. I hate that kind of shit. But it went on to make $97 million. It probably did all right for itself.
Okay.
And over on Letterboxd, with 452,000 people, they weighed in at a 3.6 Very respectable.
Yes. Is that all because of Timothée Chalamet?
Well, it's one hell of a performance.
Or is it all Bob Dylan fans?
There's probably a lot of those guys too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm stuck somewhere between a 2.5 and a 3. I appreciate a lot of the tightness around this film in a lot of ways. That performance was excellent. Timothy was excellent, but it also bored me in a lot of ways. I am not the biggest fan of these character-driven films. I had the same issue with Lady Bird. Probably one of the only character-driven films that I really liked was Pearl. I'm sure there are others, but this is the one that's always stuck with me. I can see the merits of a good film here. I don't know if I would recommend this to anyone.
Yeah, that's kind of funny because it's probably one of the few biopics I would recommend. I think James Mangold has captured something really special in that frustration, that stubbornness with Bob. It'd be funny if he wasn't actually a frustrating person. And maybe James has got a bone to pick, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I would recommend it in a studying film kind of way, but not go watch this, you need to watch this because I think you'll enjoy it kind of way.
Yeah, it tiptoes into that slice of life kind of thing with Bob, except there seems to be this air of I'm doing God's work, somewhere in the vein of maybe Amadeus or something, but less in the vein of the Florida Project film, Sean Baker's. So less in the sense of a day in the life of Bob Dylan and more in the let this man do God's work. It's a perspective, man. It's like I said, it's kind of like that nihilistic main character in a film. That guy's boring, Bob tiptoes into that space. We don't know what he's thinking in a lot of ways. We don't know his perspective in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but you can still have that type of character and have a great movie.
That's absolutely true. We see that in Amadeus, actually. And it's because we get the perspective of Salieri on Amadeus. If we got Mozart's perspective, it probably wouldn't have been as interesting, right?
Right.
Because he's this arrogant little prick, right, who finds everything so funny. And we get some of that here because we get everyone else's perspective on this, this angel that God has sent us, right?
I guess.
Yeah. And it works in a lot of ways, I think. So it's a solid 3, I think, for me. I struggled also with the 2.53. It's so complete, it's hard to not give it that 3 for me. There's some loose ends, especially with Pete, because he's, kind of central side character. I don't know how to gauge him. Johnny Cash seems to be this weird angle I can't quite put my finger on either.
Mm-hmm.
There's some odd things happening. Gonna have to sit with it for a little bit more. But there's a lot that's really working here for me, so very happy to say a 3. In my book, James Gold has done it again. It's not quite as good as Ford versus Ferrari. That's an excellent movie.
That I recommend.
But yeah, man, thank you very much again. And thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Filmistines. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, we post every Wednesday and Friday with brand new episodes on all of our free feed, and every other Monday on patreon.com/Filmistines for Patreon exclusives. Our next episode will be on speaking of maybe pretentious, the so-called excellent Ridley Scott film, Gladiator.
No.
Very much looking forward to that talk.
I'm not looking forward to watching Gladiator.
Please look forward to that. I can't wait to see Gladiator 2. That's coming up too, spoilers.
Great. 2 Gladiator films back to back.
I can't wait. Please look forward to those. That'll be a lot of fun. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon as well. Come subscribe. Come write in. Come request a movie, maybe. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much. But until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Filmistines. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on our cinematic journey. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some new insights and perspectives on the world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, especially Patreon, at patreon.com/filmistines, and follow us on social media for more film-related content. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any feedback, suggestions, movie recommendations, or book recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, keep watching and keep loving the magic of movies. This is the Filmistines, signing off.